بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. Professor Dato Muhammad Abu Bakr, Professor Ahmed Khaliq, Professor Tamim, and all the professors and participants who are with us today, welcome to our Istac-World Professorial Lecture number 17. Alhamdulillah, since we started last year on this Iwpl Istac-World Professorial Lecture, Alhamdulillah, many great scholars, professors, experts, even Prime Minister and other great achievers and dignitaries have presented their thoughts and ideas to in this platform of the Istac-World Professorial Lecture. There are a variety of areas that have been touched and discussed by those great scholars, and many of them come from Malaysia and overseas. Scholars from Jordan, South Africa, Canada, USA, Japan, Indonesia, and here in Malaysia and many other parts have participated in this Iwpl, including some ambassadors, like the ambassador of Belgium, the ambassador of Kuwait, and many others. Brothers and sisters, this platform or Istac-World Professorial Lecture is gaining its momentum and providing ideas and views on various issues and problems facing and encountering the world today. And we are expecting that this platform will become more stronger and more global towards the end of 2023, as we are inviting more great scholars and established experts to address issues facing the world today. Alhamdulillah, today we have with us one of our scholars in Malaysia here, Professor Dato Muhammad Abu Bakr, who is a very well-known scholar here in Malaysia, and his ideas and views are really celebrated by many circles. Prof. Muhammad will be speaking to us today on a very important topic, which is social Islam, the dynamics of social Islam, which I consider one of the new and very important topics to address, especially in a platform like ISTAC, International Institute for Islamic Thought and Civilization. Maybe many of us, when we hear the concept or the term social Islam from the Arab world perspective or the African perspective or the Asian perspective, what comes to our mind first is talking about the social aspects of Islam or the social system of Islam, or maybe how Islam can be translated into a society and a social structure system that helps translate the teachings of Islam into a societal framework and also culture and application. So many of these questions and ideas will be explored by our professor today. And without delay, I would like to call upon Professor Khaliq Ahmed, who is the moderator for the Istac-World Professorial number 17 today. For your information, Prof. Khaliq is one of the senior scholars and also managers of the university, IIUM. He was the Dean of the Kulliyah of Economics and Management, and also the Dean of Islamic Banking and Finance, and the Dean of many other bodies here in the university. So Professor Khaliq will be moderating the session. Once again, I welcome all the participants today who are with us in the Zoom and in the YouTube channel. I welcome again our guest of honor, Professor Dato Muhammad Abu Bakr, and I hand over to Professor Khaliq. Go ahead, Prof. Khaliq.
Thank you. Jazakumullah khairan. Thank you. Salat wa salam ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursalin wa alihi wa sahbihi ajmain. Thank you, Prof. Abdul Aziz Bargut. I was supposed to introduce you and then you welcome and then you have now welcomed me. So thank you very much for that. Then nevertheless, for your kind words. Let us come direct to the topic. In fact, this is the 17th World Professional Lecture. So I was wondering, is it becoming like the IPL, International Premier Leagues? So now we have the 17th session today. And as you rightly mentioned, there have been great scholars, people of words and literature and many background. But today's topic actually is very interesting. Dimensions and dynamics of social Islam, a civilizational discourse. And this is a very interesting topic. I wish and I hope that many of our participants from elsewhere, I mean those who are from Nigeria, from the other continents, they will also enjoy. So let us listen to Dato, and none other than the Dato would be competent to speak about this topic. So with that, I guess that let me have this opportunity to welcome to Yang Berbahagia Dato Muhammad Abu Bakr, who is the holder of the Sultan Mizan Zainal Abidin Chairholder at UNISA. And the flow of the events, as you all know, after welcoming his speech, we go directly to the guest speaker. And then we have about maybe that 45 to 50 minutes, leave it to you. And later on, then we would have a Q&A session for about 15 to 20 minutes. So those of the participants, you hold your horses, better keep your questions. The best way is maybe when it crosses your mind, don't interrupt the session during the Dato is speaking. You can just put it on the WhatsApp group and YouTube, normally we capture those things in the chat and Dato would be most likely responding to them. After Q&A session, there will be a virtual certificate of appreciation presentation to Yang Berbahagia. And finally, Dr. Nick, I wish he is around. Dr. Nick will be actually speaking. He will be making the dua for the closing parts of it. Just briefly for me, Prof. Dato Muhammad Abu Bakr, who is currently Sultan Mizan Zainal Abidin Chairholder with UNISA, Terengganu, was formerly head of the Department of International and Strategic Studies, University of Malaya. He was also the 12th Tun Abdul Razak Chairholder at Ohio University, USA. His other overseas appointments included fellowship at the OCIS, Oxford Center of Islamic Studies. Prof. Nizami, good friend of mine there. University of Washington, USA, Victoria, in Wellington and New Zealand, and visiting professor at La Plata National University, Argentina. His areas of specialization cover Islamic revivalism, contemporary globalization, Malay history, and Malaysia's foreign policy. So maybe it's good to listen, Prof. Dato. His writing includes The Actualization of an Ideal, a pioneer work about Islamic resurgence in Malay. And then there are very good publication, Caliphate writ large, the globalization of Islamic values and clash of cultures. That's a great topic. Keynote address at International Conference on Civilizational Dialogue. It was held on 16 May 2017. And second, Connectivity and Constructivism, Islam, Colonial History, and Malaysia's Foreign Policy, in our that Osman Bakar's edited book, Colonialism in the Malay Archipelago. It was published by Istac in 2020, which is pretty latest. The Failure of the Social Islam, paper presented at the International Conference on Social Islam, UNISA. And of course, Dato actually, if I go talking, I think perhaps I will take the whole time period only introducing Dato. It will be unfair for the audience to directly benefit from Yang Berbahagia Dato Muhammad Abu Bakar. So with that, I think let us welcome Yang Berbahagia Dato Muhammad Abu Bakar for the session. And please remember to take note of the points, and if there is any, do use the chat room or maybe send through your WhatsApp. We will be able to attend to it. With that, thank you. Dato, you are welcome. Please, floor is yours.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Walaikum assalam.
Mr. Moderator, Professor Khalid Ahmad, thank you for your generous introduction. And of course, Professor Aziz Bahud, quite familiar because we were together once in Istac. Of course, Professor Tamin, Professor Osman Bakar, who happens to be here, and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being able to come and participate in this discourse on the subject of social Islam. Well, in the first place, let me spell out early that it is quite redundant to speak, of course, in a way, about social Islam, for the simple reason that social Islam has always been an integral part of Islam, has always been an integral part of Islamic teaching, and has always been part and parcel of Muslim history through and through. Nevertheless, for at least three special reasons, I'm drawn to it once again. I feel there is a need to revisit the subject in the context of our time. Firstly, it is because of our preoccupation with political Islam and the pursuit of individual ibadah or personal worship. Our preoccupation and the pursuit of this in particular have led to a kind of a peripheralization of social Islam. Whereas in the case of political Islam, which is recently dubbed as a failure of sort, whereas in the case of the pursuit of individual worship, which has somehow driven some of us into a kind of retreat, that altogether, fortunately or unfortunately, have given a bad image of Islam itself, especially following the so-called failure of the various attempts in various countries to resurrect the Sharia, and the negative portrayal of Islam as a result of its so-called political participation in the various Muslim countries. So in other words, as a result of this, there has been a peripheralization of other aspects of Islam, notably social Islam, due to our preoccupation with political Islam and to pursuit of just individual Islam, in some cases, among some people in some countries. That is the first reason why I am once again drawn to the issue of social Islam. Number two, our emphasis all along on social Islam has given a lopsided view of the subject. We have not been able to see the larger picture pertaining to social Islam. Of course, in Islam, the hablum minan nas in relations to the hablum min Allah are quite related. But unfortunately, for many Muslims, there is a lopsidedness in terms of their attempts to interpret and to actualize the two aspects of Islam, to the extent that they are more or less sacrificing social Islam on the altar of either political Islam or individual Islam. So in other words, the potentials associated with social Islam have been more or less underestimated, have been relegated into the background, little knowing that many of the things in life as a Muslim, in order to advance the cause of Islam, one also can follow the channels, the so-called social channels. In other words, in order to augment individual worship, one can have it also incorporated within the scheme of things, social Islam, i.e., social Islam can be an extension of individual worship. Social Islam can even reinforce individual worship, and through some kind of repentance through society, we are able somehow to overcome not just personal grievances, but also to get forgiveness from God. So in other words, the social dimension is very important, and yet it has been de-emphasized by many to the extent that social Islam has been further relegated into the background. So in other words, because of our earlier preoccupation with political Islam, we are only in the know about political Islam. We have heard it. Well, there's a book even by Oliver Roy, if I'm not mistaken, on the subject of the failure of political Islam. And when it comes to individual worship, you have tons and tons of books on the subject, but there's not much book or much writing on the subject of social Islam. I'm not denying the fact that there have been works on the subject, classical works on the subject, either modern works on the subject by Said Qutb, Said Ramadan, Hamka, you name it, there's so many of them. But many of them more or less attempt to look at it from the traditional point of view by invoking some of the classics in order to augment their thinking regarding social Islam. This is number two. Number three, the reason why I'm drawn to social Islam is because of the increasing space involved in terms of Muslim participation at a global level. We are now interacting more and more with the rest others as a result of greater fraternalization, falling globalization, as a result of migration, meeting between Muslims and non-Muslim, as a result of migration, as a result of Muslims' mobility, moving to non-Muslim countries. All in all, many in their attempts to pursue Islam are in also positions to somehow actualize the Islamic social ideals in their new place. So in other words, democratization in many Muslim countries and also in non-Muslim countries have paved the way for the implementation of social Islamic values or Islamic social values in the arena concerned. At the same time, through this kind of juxtaposition between Muslim and non-Muslim, through their social association with the rest others, by the creation of the Islamic social and beyond, so to speak, we are able to attract the attention of others and touch the others into the orbit of social Islam without them necessarily become Muslim. So if these very Muslims are able to act as great Muslim social workers, for example, as great Muslim social activists, for example, in those areas of life, either in Muslim or non-Muslim countries, their very presence, their and beyond, can have a lasting impact, positively speaking, on the rest others. So it is a kind of a da'wah, whereby actions speaks louder than words, whereby through their extrapolation of Islam, through their appropriation of Islamic values in the new social setting, they are able to impact around, including on non-Muslim. So this is the civilizational dimension, I think, that one needs to explore when it comes to understanding social Islam. So far, unfortunately, and I'm going to go into the details of it later, unfortunately, that very thing, i.e. social Islam, has not been impacting as much as it should, for the simple reason that A, the Muslims are not able to actualize their ideals in the new setting abroad, or through their failure at home to practice social Islam to the fullest, to make Islam a really a way of life, including social Islam. And that all in all has created some kind of lopsidedness in terms of our understanding of Islam, and also for the other to view Islam in the full light of the day. So that brings us to this very important question. What is social Islam? What constitutes social Islam? Well, put simply, social Islam is Islamic social life or Islamic social existence underpinned by Islamic social values or underpinned by Islam. It can exist on its own, subsist within a larger polity. It can be also a structure with Islamic values subsisting within the larger political milieu owned by Muslims or propagated by Muslims or dominated by Muslims. So either way, it can be of its own, or it can be subsisting within another structure, Muslims or non-Muslim. So in other words, so long as this social Islam is vibrant in nature, so long as it is able to exhibit the true values and the true colors of Islam, so long as its members, individualized members of the society concerned, are able to contribute to the well-being of the society in concern, then they are very present. Inshallah, we have a great impact on it. So as far as Muslim history is concerned, I must say that we have been with social Islam throughout the Muslim history, during the days of the Prophet, during the days of the Sahaba, and all that. At the same time, social Islam throughout the ages for the last 1,500 years also have been able to somehow incorporate some of the local values in the new countries that Islam was able to enter. Islam was able to make its advance. In Malaysia, for example, there are aspects of social life, such as the gotong royong, the mutual help, which was popular among the Malays, was later on incorporated as part and parcel of that social makeup, part of the Islamic social structure in Malaysia itself. So in other words, social Islam can be a cumulative experience so long as it is based on Islamic value and glued towards certain Islamic goal. God consciousness in the context and in the cauldron of society, and the translation of those ideas in practice by members of the group, and in this case, members of the group of the Muslim society. So here we can see that how social Islam has been in operation through and through throughout Muslim history. Of course, the other question will be whether so far Muslims have been in this kind of situation or not, or has we allowed the predicament, the outside predicament, overtaken us to the extent that there has been a diminution of the role of social Islam in our life. Well, I must say that to say that social Islam has not been with the Malays in particular, or with the Malaysian in general, is equally wrong. Of course, through their practice of salat, prayer, their practice of zakat, almsgiving, and their pilgrimage to Mecca, while they are all hinging on personal commitment and personal worship, they also have a social dimension. And this is pretty well known. The zakat will bring together Muslims. The Hajj will bring them into some kind of togetherness. And the prayer will also bring to bear on them the need to socialize, at least at the congregational prayer in the mosque. Fastabiqul khairat, how they are able to advance the Islamic cause. Or inna salati wa inna salata tanha anil fahsya'i wal munkar, how the prayers of the Muslim are able to ward off against evil, against evildoing and whatnot. So in other words, the social ramification of salat, of the Hajj, of Siyam, also means that there are social obligation towards the helpless, towards the have-nots, and also, if one delve further, the Islamic legislation pertaining to jinayah, crime and punishment, pertaining to munakahat, marriage and divorce, pertaining to muamalat, community living, then we can easily expand the social dimension of Islam. And this has been actualized also in Muslim history. So in other words, the very emphasis on Hajj in a true sense of the word, the very appropriation of Islamic values in Siyam, fasting to the fullest, and also to their participation at the Hajj in the true sense of the word, will willy-nilly bring Muslim into some kind of social relation, social connection, so much so that Muslim, by virtue of their participation in those activities, are actually socializing themselves, are actually becoming members of a bigger society, are actually contributing to the social well-being, etc., etc. But at the same time, there are also the other guiding principles. The underlying principle which somehow have affected the Siyam, the Salat, the Zakat, but which also are equally important, which should also account Muslims' relationship well beyond the Salat, well beyond the fasting, well beyond the Zakat giving, etc., etc. This involves the ethics in the economic life. This involves the need to do good and behave properly and with adab towards your neighbor. This involves the question of exhorting others to do good and to increase their contribution to society. And this also means that understanding that the best among you are those who are best to others. So these principles of Islam, while quite embedded in the Salat, while quite embedded in the fasting, while quite embedded in the Hajj, are not really brought to bear in the larger aspect of life, well beyond those various activities. So in other words, the hablum minan nas, which is inherent in this kind of teaching, has not been exploited, in particular, to the full. Not to mention the image acquired by the Muslims all over the world. They are considered not serious, not able to keep their time. They are not considered hardworking. They are considered dirty. And all these are manifestations of their inability to translate the Islamic social ideals in their day-to-day life. And that, all in all, have created a dent in the image of Islam, where God is said to be beautiful and love beauty. These very Muslims are not able to manifest themselves in the way they should. They don't seem to pursue beautiful things. Well, while the Europeans are having a beautiful landscape, beautiful surrounding, reminiscence of Andalusia probably, with their kitchen gardens, a forest garden, and wall garden, so to speak. These very Muslim are mirrored in this kind of life, which are far, far from attractive. So the upshot is that the very Muslims that I'm concerned with now should somehow advance their cause beyond the present perimeter. The word that they should go well beyond the compounds of today's worship. They should create greater awareness, accountability, and also consciousness in the larger circle, so that everyone among us are able to imbibe these great values of Islam involving the society and the environment. Otherwise, the prayer is just the coming and the going at the mosque. And this is happening in Malaysia. The zakat is the giving and the distributing of alms or aids. And the hajj is the visiting, the chanting, and the touring part of it. Once they leave the mosque, they virtually have forgotten all the promises made. Inna salati wa nusuki wa mahyaya wa mamati lillahi rabbil alamin. Or the moment the fasting month is over, that community consciousness, the civic consciousness associated with the fasting month was virtually left at the door of the mosque or at the door of the house. Likewise, upon returning home from Mecca or Medina, in spite of the great promises they made while there, they too somehow look as if have abandoned the cause of Islam. So in other words, looking at the larger picture, these various avenues have not been fully exploited by the Muslims, in spite of their obsession with personal worship, in spite of their obsession with political Islam. They willingly have forgotten this very dimension of Islam. So, Mr. Chairman, looking at it, one can say that there is a need to somehow look at social Islam by enthronement or some kind of enactment or reenactment of Islamic social principle, so that the word is the Muslim will have a full life. I'm going to stress this because of their lopsided development, by their virtue of abandoning social Islam, they have not been able to live a full Islamic life. That is the first one. Secondly, Islam being a multifaceted religion has not been properly treated. Islam as a multifaceted civilization has not been fairly followed and pursued in the course of their life. And because of that, what we have arising from this inability to translate Islam into the full Islam, as I've said, we find that we don't have a healthy environment. We don't have a healthy neighborhood. We don't have a healthy family life. And even the question of the garbage collection and the garbage disposal among us, falling ill, for example, I've seen all over. We are not able to attend to it. Whereas these are crucial, and unfortunately, it also happens in areas supposedly to be managed by the lawmakers, the policymakers, who are elected on Islamic platform, for example. They are supposed to look and care their constituency, create an Islamic constituency of sort in terms of the well-being of the people, in terms of the environment surrounding it, and in terms of the social goals of the members of the society are concerned. And now with COVID-19 pandemic, I suppose it becomes all the more crucial for the Muslim policymakers and the lawmakers to actualize the Islamic social ideal, so much so that their presence will make a difference. But otherwise, they are no different from the rest others. So in that sense, I think if there is no pervasive influence of Islamic social ideals, if there is no spontaneous relation or reactions to the problems at hand, if there are no vigilante organization, you don't have the kind of things that are supposed to be there on the scene, then we are living a gaping hole in the social life of the Muslim. And this becomes all the more serious with globalization, because arising from the admixture of more people, the conflation of various religions across the globe, and the need for the kind of harmonization of interests pertaining to justice, fairness, transparency, then we are more or less exposing further our weaknesses to the rest others, as a result of our inability to translate those ideas of Islam. So, Mr. Moderator, now I'll come to other part of the talk, i.e. the failure of social Islam, as a corollary to all that. I've mentioned earlier about the fate that has befallen political Islam. So much so that there is a book by Oliver Roll entitled The Failure of Political Islam. I'm not sure we can dub social Islam in the same way. But looking at the lofty ideals that have been toyed around by our scholars, we have been invoking the past by cherry-picking the periods of Islam which are at times unrepresentative, which are more or less parodying the narrative in certain remote areas when they are not representative of Islam. As for today, there is less and less reasons for us to crow about the so-called Islam's ability to produce the like of Japan, the like of Scandinavian countries, the like of New Zealand, and the like of Ireland. We have fared not as well as them, in spite of the fact that we are God-driven, the fact that we have been promising day and night to actualize Islam, including social Islam. Even in Malaysia, in the 70s and the 80s, I think Professor Osman Bakar is pretty well aware, we were quite able to somehow advance the cause of Islam by articulating our concern in order to make Islam a way of life. We were quite successful. We were also able to sell the idea that Islam was and is an answer, a problem-solving exercise in the context of multiracial Malaysia. But in the course of that 20 years or so, we were not able to advance that far when it comes to the promulgation of Islamic social ideal. I would summarize this by saying that there is the presence of absence of social Islam. The word is the presence of absence of social Islam as far that is concerned. Secondly, there are those Muslims who are driven by other prospects, embracing the cause of capitalism, who abandon social Islam for good. They are greatly enticed into the new orbit, so-called the capitalist world, not only because of the material promise, but also because of the so-called beauty shown by some of those people who imbibe the capitalist culture, especially among those Muslims who have migrated, having left their countries, and now are more or less living under the shadow of capitalism and whatnot. It is a great loss when they, upon living in a new polity, should somehow pursue the Islamic cause, advance the Islamic social ideals, and in no time are able to create the Islamic enclave in the midst, not just by building mosques, not just by collecting zakat, but also by creating in the midst of this capitalist world and Islamic and beyond, which is going to impact all around, which is going to be severed by Muslims and non-Muslim in those countries. I do know that there have been Muslim individuals in America. I've forgotten his name, who have more or less are able to do that. He not only built a mosque, a community service center, but also are able to provide handouts to the poor in those areas. It is the Islamic spirit, the community consciousness among these people, which have propelled them somehow to go that far, in spite of the fact that they are living in an alien world, America, so to speak. So in other words, in that sense, when looking overallly, we are perfectly imperfect when it comes to translating the Islamic social idea, as I've noted earlier. Worse still, if one cares to look at our fish market, to look at the vegetable markets and other areas in our neighborhood, you compare all that with what you can find in the fish market in Japan, in Korea, or in the so-called Islamic cities, and try to compare them with Seoul and Seattle, considered the safest cities in the world. We are not able to showcase that for the sake of Islam. So in other words, in spite of Islam being spelled out in rhetorical flourish, I sometimes feel, sadly to say, that in our enthusiasms in advancing the Quranic injunction and Hadith exhortation pertaining to the beauty of Islam, Islam being of a region on a higher plane, in so doing, we are more or less making a mockery of those reading, in a sense. I'm not in the full sense, but in a sense. We talk about the greatness of Islam, the beauty of Islam, the love of God towards those who are beautiful, the need to be secured, and so on and so forth. Day in and day out now in Malaysia, I've been listening to the Quran right over the radio, on TV, but you look around at our social surrounding, it dawns on you that, are you telling me that you are mocking a mockery of Islam itself? I'm not blaming those Quranic readers. They read for good. But if you care to translate the meaning of that and compare between the rhetoric and the reality, you find it is most saddening. Even among neighbors, we have heard a lot. They are Muslim neighbors. When neighbors are supposed to look after neighbors, to love neighbors more than to love themselves, probably. To the extent that Prophet once said that if at all there's no provision, neighbors are supposed to give their wealth as inheritance to their neighbors. That is to the extent that the Prophet spoke about the need of affinity, fraternization, but all along within Muslim community, among the Dawah activists even, we have this kind of acrimonious relationship between the people of the various groups that I have just mentioned. So this externalization of Muslim attire, the halal food, and so on and so forth, if they stop just at that, without they really having an impact beyond that, in terms of their interaction with the rest others, in terms of their connection with the rest others, then I think the Congressional Prayer, which is becoming more and more popular these days, the fast, the Hajj, which has brought more and more people from all over the world, have not produced a proportionate impact. The word is a proportionate impact on the life of the Muslim at the social level. Again, not to mention the corruption, the bribery, the exhortation, and the moral degradation associated with our youth, with our officers, and so on, and so fast. Well, if at all that is the case, the famous saying, and I've been quoting this all along, and I hope I'm allowed to reiterate once again, when it comes to money, people are of the same religion. Apparently, there is no exception. The Muslims, not unlike the rest others, are also in the same mold when it comes to money. I'm not too sure when it comes to sex, when it comes to politics, and what have you. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Moderator, I find that it is sad to have to think along the way. Now I'll come to the last part. I'll go into the concluding part by saying that what is needed is Islam in being, not just Islam in name. And in order to achieve that, we have to actualize all those values of Islam, not just political Islam, individual Islam, but social Islam. And this malperformance of the Muslims demands that we react immediately to redress to the situation. In fact, I must say that this is something overdue. So that we are able to leave a legacy of a kind, a social history for emulation, a lasting monument to our generation. We may not have an Angkor Wat, we may not have a Borobudur, but with this kind of social edifice, in the forms of a social existence, a social life which is inherited, which molds people, which civilize people, which impact Muslims and non-Muslims. And this is going to go a long way in terms of contributing to Muslim life in particular and to the whole civilization in general. Number two, by having this kind of Islamic life at a social level, we are able to leverage some of the negative impact of Islam arising from our failures politically, as I've noted earlier. This is something that can somehow sanitize the bad effect as a result of the failure of political Islam, and partly an answer to the kind of Islamophobia which is rather rampant today. And in this regard, we need a new narrative which involves both ideology and strategy. I'm stressing this, both ideology and strategy. Ideology meaning that we have to somehow crystallize our thought using classical works, contemporary works, and there should be a meeting of the great minds to try and concord an Islamic approach to social Islam in the contemporary world by taking into account the exigencies of our time. Well, they have Das Kapital, they have the wealth of nation, but sad to say, we don't have a similar template of a kind to enable us to manage our situation now. Of course, there are lots of books, like Kutub with his social justice in Islam, Hamka with keadilan social in Islam, you name it. But I suppose that there's a need for a kind of a repackaging of a kind to be able it to be translatable into action, to ensure that people of our generation are able to have a social construction of reality in a more convincing manner. Only with that, we can debunk those ideas that we say Islam is the best religion and the Muslims are the worst of followers. We need to overhaul that. Islam is the best of religion. Muslim are the best of followers. And finally, I must say that enough is enough. We have gone through 1,500 years. Social Islam is still lacking behind. And the pursuit of it has not been zealously undertaken. And the good side about social Islam is that it's not going to be as sensitive as political Islam. When you go into political Islam, people thought about the conflict with other ideologies. They talk about amputation of the hands. They talk about the flogging. I thought about the illiberal aspect of Islam. They put barriers and barriers to Islam, even before political Islam speaks for itself. Personal Islam, they couldn't be bothered. Even Russia, they will allow mosques and mosques to be built. So long as they pursue personal Islam, the tariqat, etc., they couldn't be bothered. But the beauty of social Islam, they don't have to face that kind of provision, inhibition as faced by political Islam. And unlike personal Islam, yes, a wider impact, greater ramification for society and the world. And inshallah, through the medium of social Islam, the pursuit of political Islam and the pursuit of personal Islam will also be realized. This is the catch. So, Mr. Moderator, I hope I've done enough for today. I have sore throat, unfortunately. I'm not able to really articulate my concern in the way I want it to be. But inshallah, with those views put across, brothers and sisters in Islam, at least are able to have a good grasp of the meaning of social Islam, or at least augment the understanding of social Islam after we have fetishized it, relegated it into the background for too long. So Professor Khalid and Professor Aziz, that is about all from me. These are, to cap it all, I must say, these are personal, preliminary observation based on personal observation, preliminary observation based on personal finding. I'm yet to invoke the classic. I'm yet to invoke the words of Said Qutb and the rest others. I hope I'm able to sever more of their thoughts in order that we can have a better understanding of social Islam pertaining to our life in Malaysia in particular and Muslim world in general. But I must say, what I'm saying may not look representative of the Muslim world, but having gone to some of the Muslim world, having visited a good many Muslim countries, I must say, what I've said really is quite representative of it all. Not much of an exception, unless, ladies and gentlemen, you're able to come forward and say this is the Islamic social way as evident in certain Muslim countries. So, wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakumullah khairan. Thank you, and Bagia Dato, for your wonderful words. I can see that you are struggling due to your throat, but you managed to convey the message. Basically, that you wanted to talk to this intellectual discourse and the community around here. There is a mushrooming of the questions, actually. So, looking at your situation, I would rather say when the question papers are put, there is always options. You can ask 7 questions, but I can only answer, you are supposed to only answer 3 or 4 questions. So up to you to choose. If you are able to answer all, by all means. If not, then I will leave it to you. But
well, if I could not answer, I will leave it to all to answer on my behalf. Don't worry. I know you are also experts. Professor Asman will be at the building also.
Yeah. Prof. Osman is smiling as if like is what impressed me that money matters. Money actually is not everything. People, that's what very common, but the issue is they say everything needs money. So that's where it encompasses all of us. It reminds me like you put the gold idols and then you see some people worshipping it. Then we hate them. We say, oh, these are mushrikeen. They are idolaters. But somebody said, you melt this idol, the gold idol, into the coins, then everybody say, yeah, it is important, it matters. So we Muslims are not exception to that religion. So to say, as you rightly pointed out, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq and hidayat. Being a moderator, I should not actually spoil time. I would rather open the floor for discussions. And now there are a couple of questions which are actually in my WhatsApp and also in the chat room. There is a sort of like many important questions. Some you have already answered during, your lecture, but nevertheless, I wouldn't know. Should I follow the LIFO system, last in, first out, or FIFO system? In account.
I leave it to you, Professor Khalid.
Yes, thank you. So yes, actually, we always in accounting, the logistic management, we always use the FIFO or LIFO, first in, first out, last in, first out. So the last is actually last in, first out is, there is a question. Thank you, Prof. Muhammad, for your excellent lecture. If you agree that social Islam is lacking, can you tell us how do you see it implemented? What are the indicators and activities that society should do to reflect social Islam? This is the latest question just arrived, so I begin with that first.
Thank you, Professor Khalid. I think I've already gone into it by spelling out in some details about the roles of salat, fasting, siyam, zakat, etc., with all their social ramification. At the same time, I do say that by extension, these various Islamic activities can also include their social works, especially during the fasting month, social activities for those at the congregational prayers, and also for those upon returning home from Mecca and Medina. So their promises made at those places, more or less, should be translated into some kind of social action. And that is one thing that I've already mentioned in passing. But of course, there are also other areas of life which are not connected to either salat or siyam, etc., but are also underpinned by equal social Islamic consideration, that you have to do good to others. The best among you are those who are good to others. Those who are good to others on this earth, will receive the blessing of God, will receive the forgiveness of God, and so on and so forth. So those are tangible and intangible things that can come along the way. So it is for them to understand the situation. You don't have to be categorical in that, but depending on your situation, you can somehow translate into social action. For example, in the hadith or in the history of Islam, there is a story being evoked about a person who removed a piece of stick on the road. But it doesn't have to be a stick anymore. The extrapolation from there can be many things, well beyond the stick. That's what I'm trying to say. Because in a simple society, probably there are simple things that need to be done, but the spirit is the same. The civic consciousness is the same. So you can see how the Japanese, whether we like it or not, it is good to invoke their experience, at least as an example. And furthermore, many people have been invoking their experience, for example, how they have been attending football matches recently, how they rush to collect the garbage all over, which was not done by the rest others, which means there is a spontaneous reaction coming from the inner side. So we are hoping similar thing to happen among Muslims, that kind of spontaneity in terms of reaction when it comes to the downtrodden and the distress. When it comes to seeing the homeless people, when it comes to seeing the plight of the migrants, so to speak. So this is part of the individual makeup that should be of the Muslim people. And that social makeup or individual makeup become part of the social makeup. And at the end of the day, it becomes a collective makeup. And that is what is lacking.
Thank you, Dato' Berbagi. Actually, a similar question was there. Does the lacking of a strong social Islam means that the ritualistic Islamic is more dominating in our life? If yes, what are the best approach to? So it's something closer to the previous question. Maybe there was a question. There's one hands up, Brother Abdul Hamid. Before I read the questions in the chat room, would you mind to unmute yourself and directly ask the question? Your hands are up there, Brother Abdul Hamid. Brother Abdul Hamid, your hands are up. I can see here. Yes.
Assalamualaikum.
Alaikum salam rahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Yes, Brother.
Hi, Prof.
Alhamdulillah. Please put your
Can you
question.
hear me? Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. But I don't know if I'm not mistaken. Maybe I have missed some part of the lecture. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we are hearing. We are hearing you.
Please proceed.
Go ahead.
Please proceed. Yes.
Yeah, I think I have a problem.
Your connectivity, Brother Abdul Hamid, is having a difficulty. We can't hear you now. Brother Abdul Hamid.
Well, probably Professor Khalid, let me address the question first while waiting for Mr. Hamid. Is all right?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. You refer to the rituals, which is becoming more and more prominent in Muslim society. Probably for some, there is a simple way out. It's easy to understand, easy to follow, easy to bring people around in a ritual of sort. And secondly, of course, the dawah activists, those who go propagating Islam, probably are more prone to emphasizing the ritual when it comes to spreading the words of God, because the audience might be of the captive mind. People who are equally simple-minded. So one way is through this conduit, hoping that in the long run, they will pursue a kind of higher Islam. It's not just a ritual. But unfortunately, more often than not, they end up with all the rituals in their life. That is the sad thing. That is why in many nook and corner of the Muslim world, people are still immersed in this kind of rituals. And the rituals have overtaken the substance of Islam. The spirit of Islam is gone as a result of the ritual. And there is no way for you to somehow bring to bear the real Islam to them after they have imbibed it for, let's say, 100 years or so. It becomes stamite. It becomes part and parcel of their body society. And no amount of effort can somehow change that course of event. That is the unfortunate part.
Thank you, Dato'. There is another question, and I'm not very sure whether there is a need to explain, but look like someone from IIUM, because IIUM now following this very, very stringent way. Do you think attending to the 17 SDG Sustainable Development Goals can help revise the aspects of social Islam? I think this SDG, 17 SDG promulgated by the United Nations. So there are many areas of them. So I wouldn't know who is the one asking this question, but they are relating with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal, 17 SDGs. So the question is, do you think attending the 17 Sustainable Development Goals can help revive the aspects of social Islam? That's the question.
Well, the things that Professor Khalid anything goes in the sense that there's no harm in us associating with any of this event, so long as we look from the Islamic perspective. There are areas that emanate from this kind of convention where we can savor some of the good cause in their pursuits of the goal, and somehow by articulating them along Islamic line, by somehow Islamize it. For example, in the case of the sustainable development, there are many things that are in accord, meaning that not in conflict with Islam, but so long as you are able to look at it from the Islamic perspective, the way you are looking at development as a whole, material development. If you go for material development, for the sake of material development, then there is a bit of a deviation. But if you go for material development in pursuits of God, in order to worship Him, all because what is on this earth are God-given, are meant to be harnessed for the sake of God, then I would have thought sustainable development can be a good basis, so long as we look from the Islamic perspective. That is what I mean.
Thank you. Actually, there is another question. I remember you have already addressed this during your lecture, but nevertheless, maybe the participant started joining your lecture late, but I know you have addressed already this issue. The question is, what are the real reasons of the lacking of social Islam in our contemporary society? So this is the question.
Yes. Well, the things that we are very much on the sideline of history. By that, I mean, politically, we have been very much driven by the ideological conflict. And at the end of the day, there was this triumphant capitalism as the end goal of these very people, to the extent that they can pronounce the end of history. So politically, we have been left out. And for some others, they have been on the bandwagon. Likewise, the mainstream of social thought, social thinking, and social action also have been very much influenced by other ideologies, other political discourse, so to speak. And the Muslims are also on the sideline as a result of that. So the very reason why I'm invoking this very subject now is to tell us all that we have been fertilized, we have been sacrificing social Islam in our pursuit of our other goals, which are not necessarily Islamic. And secondly, by going a big way for social Islam, we can some have remedial action, directly or indirectly. Indirectly, when we are able to put in place social Islam, and social Islam speaks for itself, and that becomes an attraction of sort. And secondly, on the basis of the success of social Islam, inshallah, other forms of Islam will bear better fruits, so to speak. The crux of the matter is that with globalization, with democratization, the individuals now have better choices, but they are also exposed to more choices. That is it. So if they are anchored in social Islam with a view to actualizing the Islamic goal, with a view to committing themselves more and more to God, then inshallah, they will choose the social Islamic path in order to achieve that goal. So far, we have left that social Islamic path in order to pursue other goal, or when it comes to choosing social path of other religions, other people, other country, we more or less have abandoned ours. That's it.
Okay, thank you. So actually, there was a next question which you have directly answered to that. Lacking of the social Islam to do with secularism and globalization of the Western way of life and its domination on our life. So I think your last sentences probably has actually answered that concern.
But I can, Professor Khalid, I just add one sentence to that. You are right. I.e., the moment you abandon social Islam, you are actually secularizing yourself. You are
True.
secularizing, meaning that you have put it aside. Islam, which is represented by social Islam, in order to go for something else other than that.
Okay, so I think there are 2-3 more questions, but is there among the audience would like to directly communicate to Yang Berbahagia Dato'? So, yeah, Abdul Hamid, I see your hands up again, but you are unmuted. You are muted now. Can you unmute first?
Assalamu alaikum, Prof. Yeah, I just wrote you in the special, what you call chat box or personal. I said I had a connection problem. Thank you, Prof. Khalaq, for giving me the opportunity. Prof. Muhammad Abu Bakr, thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. I had a problem with the concept itself. I'm afraid we will divide Islam into so many parts. Because now they're talking about social Islam and political Islam, and they have before have classified Islam into many groups. Yeah, this is a problem. They said that traditional Islam, popular Islam, progressive Islam, political Islam, and now social Islam, and maybe after a while, economic Islam. So the concept itself is a little bit problematic. But also, Prof, you have mentioned Islamic social values. So if it is equivalent to this, I think we have no problem with the term itself. The terminology sometimes somehow confuse us. So Islamic social values, yes, no one doubts, because Islam is not only about individual.
But Abdul Hamid, can you go direct to your question, because let Dato respond to it. Otherwise, you'll become
it is a comment with a question, or a question with a comment. I am saying, how will you convince us about the term itself, social Islam? This is a problematic in itself. So I think if it is about Islamic social values, we all agree on it. But if it is a term that is used, because we have also a book written by Mustafa Sibari, Ishtirakiyatul Islam, and many scholars were so critical to him. I mean, how can we say socialist Islam? So if it is Islamic social values, I think it will be very clear.
Okay.
But, no.
Okay. Let the Dato respond to it. Thank you, Brother Abdul Hamid, for your pretty good questions.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Abdul Hamid. I know we are prone to becoming the victim of what we call imperialism of categories. People have been using all sorts of things. But methodologically speaking, this is just a way out of the situation when we have been presented with the so-called personal Islam and political Islam. It's very much a response to that, to complete the picture of Islam, to tell them that you have been harping not necessarily on the real Islam when you say about a political Islam, personal Islam, when Islam is holistic. So it's just a response, a question of trying to be as methodological as possible. And since today we are into some kind of intellectual or civilizational discourse, this is just a way, a medium of addressing the problem. You can use social values, social structure, but so long as you don't use it, something which is loaded ideologically, I think it's okay. The way you say Islam is capitalistic, Islam is socialistic, without giving the ideological meaning to it, I think it's okay. This is just a description, the way you describe water as water. When you say, when you use capital to go into business, it is capitalistic. Because you can use capital, not necessarily in a capitalist system. You can use capital even in a social system. So it's just a description. So it's just a way of trying to complete the picture that Islam has the political dimension, the individual dimension, the social dimension. But the intersectional relationship is so evident in Islam. There's no doubt about that. Okay, thank you.
Okay, actually, I was expecting this, anticipating, and this make me sitting on hot seat now. There is a very contemporary and very alarming issue now in view of how the Taliban in Afghanistan are justifying the relegation of women to the domestic sphere by effectively banning them from workplaces and institutions of higher learning, all in the name of Islam. Do you believe we need to go beyond merely a critique of Muslim practice or ethnic, the Islamic discourse on gender? This must be a sister. Yeah, Bibi Ishrat. So,
yeah, thank you, Professor Khalid. I think one has to understand the whole thing in its proper context. The Taliban has a history of its own, has up and downs, has been responding to the exigencies of time, either during the Soviet era, during the American occupation, etc., etc. So one cannot somehow generalize the situation there by looking necessarily from our angle, because they have their own history. There was presumably a graduated response on their part. I'm not for them in that sense, but I'm just saying that probably they are graduating in the response to it, first by allowing them to go to the university to study, and then along the way, giving them more and more freedom. And this is also happening in Saudi Arabia lately, when the abaya issue crops up. So there are areas in life where people are in danger, not secure to move around, for example. You can look at it from the angle of Seattle, for example, or Seoul, by saying, why don't you leave those women right in the middle of the night driving on their own? So you need to understand the physical environment of the country is concerned, the history, the kind of people. That is why when Graham Fuller wrote that book, whether you agree or not with it, A World Without Islam, is referring to certain areas, even without Islam, they will behave the same way also. Meaning that because of their history, because of their culture, they are behaving the way they do. So this is not an apology for them, but I'm just trying to tell that it's not just the Taliban and the Taliban world, not the Saudis and the Saudi world. It can happen anywhere. But at the end of the day, we do hope that there is harmonization of Islamic interests. The word is harmonization of Islamic interests. There should be homogenization of Islamic ideals. But whether they are going to adopt a graduated response, that is one thing. But for some countries like Malaysia, how are you going to compare it with, let's say, another country which has no similar experience? I think they're strong. So we have to go accordingly. The word is accordingly. Even from the Sirah, we know that the Prophet Muhammad SAW has been responding in different way to different people in different times with different answers. I think that is crucial, and that is wisdom. And what is seriously lacking among some of our dying is wisdom. And wisdom is the understanding in a crystallized manner, the situation at hand, and the response to be parted up as a reaction rate.
Okay, thank you. Dato, actually, there was one hands up, Warisa Azizi,
Yes.
and I think this would be the second last question. Can you, brother, sister, Warisa Azizi, can you please unmute and go directly to put your questions to Berbahagia Dato?
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Alaikum salam.
I'm from Afghanistan and I'm 25 years old. I just came here for Usul al-Fiqh studying. My question is that actually I just wanted to ask, where is pure Islam? I am as a youth Muslim, so where I should find pure Islam? I should follow Taliban, I should follow Islam in Malaysia, or I should follow the Islam in Saudi. I'm really confused, and it's not just about me. A lot of youth in my age, they are confused. So I just want to hear about this.
Thank you,
where
thank
I
you.
should follow.
Thank you, Sister Warisa. Your question is very clear and loud. Dato.
Yes. Well, I thought I'm going to get an easier exit, but apparently with, this kind of question, it makes life rather more difficult. But by the way, my response is about the same. That word graduated response is crucial in the sense that for the individual at certain age, what are your needs? What is the environment like? You have to go accordingly. The word is accordingly. So when the political situation is such that it is not amenable to whatever Islam that is going on, then you have to adjust it accordingly. There is no way that you can run roughshod into the area and وَلَا تُلْقُوا بِأَيْدِيكُمْ إِلَى التَّهْلُكَةِ. You are destroying yourself, so to speak. So if, let's say, you are in a country which has been introduced with Islam, for example, what are the things that needs to be spelled out to the very people? We do have a country, I've been told during my during a viva for one PhD student, she mentioned that how in her area, people who were only recently acquainted with Islam, who have that great tradition of pork eating, and during the prayer, suddenly a piglet ran about. She just left the prayer mat in order to catch the pig. And this is the level of Islamic consciousness for the newcomer to Islam, to the novice of Islam, so to speak. So are you going to condemn her for that? Are you going to say that it is wrong and you should get out of Islam? No. So in other words, that kind of graduated response has to take into consideration the level of Islamicity of the people and Islamness of the surrounding, and so on and so forth. So in your case, as you put it, you are baffled with the question whether to choose that way or that. But where are you in the first place? Are you in Saudi Arabia or in Afghanistan and so on and so forth? It is very crucial. For example, let me go a bit further. I'm not going into a difficult or more difficult terrain, Professor Khalid. Let's say if Malaysian, a lady from Malaysia, a young lady of 20 or 30 years old, goes to Afghanistan in her slack, in her tight slack, walking about in not just in the city center, but in the neighborhood of Drazia. When people there are in their what they call in their dress, in their Afghan attire, it looks a bit discordant in the first place, even without invoking the religious dimension of it. It's already discordant. That's what I'm trying to say. So that is the issue. And if you are in Turkey, probably, Turkey have been gone through the so-called ordeal before for the last 50 years and now becoming more and more Islamized. You can expect a full-blown Islamic life in the midst of Istanbul, for example. You have to make do with the situation, response by promulgating certain rules and regulations to ensure that some of the Islamic values are really pursued. And I think these are the things that need to be in the minds of our in the minds of our Islamic scholars. They are not in a world where everything is the same.
Thank you. Actually, this is the last question. In fact, before I just a little invite our beloved Prof. Dato' Osman to give complimentary comments, maybe after this, and then Brother Nick is also waiting for dua to close the session. But nevertheless, there is one, I think it will be unfair to not to allow him. He is saying, Brother Muhammad Shahzani, how should we presently recognize the contribution of non-Muslims in a social Islamic thought?
Yes. Of course, Professor Khalid, there are two ways of looking at it. Firstly, there are areas in life of which their actions are Islamic without them being Islamic. There is, these are areas in life that you can go into. You can also sever their achievement. In the way now we are using motorcycles and cars. They are the products of the non-Muslims. So I think there's no harm in doing that. At the same time, this kind of recognition will somehow bring them into the orbit of the society concerned. If we are Muslims, we bring them into the orbits of Islamic life by incorporating some of their findings and research. I think there's no harm in doing that, so long that it's not in conflict with our aqidah, so long it's not in conflict with the Islamic fundamentals of life. I think there's no harm in that. The very fact that many of the earlier rituals predating Islam have been incorporated in the Islamic tradition, either in Saudi Arabia itself, in Turkey, in Iran, in Indonesia, shows that Islam is both exclusive and inclusive. We are exclusive when it comes to ibadah, personal ibadah, when it comes to akidah, but we are inclusive when it comes to our ability in incorporating some of the rituals, ways of life, ways of eating, the food, etc., etc. I think the fact that we are able to enrich our Islamic life through this kind of process shows that the level of inclusivism is quite high, and that is civilization, also speak.
Thank you, Dato. Actually, with my folded hand to all, my phone is flooded with the questions, and I cannot actually detain all of them, brothers and sisters, with your enthusiasm for your participation. Lastly, we have to come to certain level of understanding and accommodating each other. Given the circumstances that Dato is coughing and everything, please allow him some rest. But before I let Dato to hang on, maybe there's some words of wisdom from Professor Osman Bakar, because you are contemporary to each other, you know each other better. The word of unmute, Prof. You are muted.
Well, I heard someone mentioning a book in honor of Professor Osman. I have not heard of it. I'm quite elated. He never mentioned it to me.
Unmute that Osman. Unmute yourself first. Now, Bule.
Okay, thank you, Professor Khalid. Well, first of all, thanks to Professor Dr. Muhammad. Yes, my all-time friend at the University of Malaya. We had a wonderful time together as academics, missions. Thank you also for your presentation just now, but I thought still on the subject of social Islam, I would like to ask, from here, where do we go? Because as I see, things are not bright at all. What I mean is, especially as the academic in the academic field, the question, the issues of social Islam, social sciences in general. First of all, what I observe is that we are declining, we are going down, sliding as far as social thought. Yeah? Society is changing and changing fast, very, 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 very rapidly. New challenges arise. Now, Islam is the last religion for humankind. There's no more religion after Islam, which means that Islam is to guide humanity for a better world. But if we don't produce social thinkers, if you don't produce social thinkers that can address the problems of humanity today, then we are failing. We are not really, we do not do justice to what we are supposed to do as followers of Islam. Islam is to provide the solution, because there's not going to be other framework solution. If there's a solution, it should be within the framework of the religion, the last religion that Allah SWT sent for humankind. And this will be challenged. This will be challenged. So we need to revive the social sciences. Look at the sciences afresh, especially the social thought Islam. We need to interpret Islam in the light of the new circumstances. That's my
Jazakumullah khair. Thank you for the word of wisdom. We will listen you more in detail, Dato, inshallah, on 6th January. Am I right, Professor Abdul Aziz? Now I would like to have a last word maybe from Professor Abdul Aziz Bargut before Brother Nick, you can start your dua for closing session. Prof. Abdul Aziz.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum once again. Alhamdulillah, I think we have come to the end of this very wonderful lecture of Prof. Muhammad Abu Bakr. We are very overwhelmed with the participation of our scholars and their discussions. We have a lot of people from overseas joined us in this lecture. I guess the topic is really important and crucial for the future of Islam and Muslim society. And I think there should be more and more discourse and discussions to shape our next project of really bringing this social Islam or civilizational Islam to the fore, from the margin to the mainstream of the Muslim life. I think this will take a lot of efforts, a lot of work. It is not an easy thing to do. But I think Prof. Dato Abu Bakr has put us actually in the forefront of the real question which the intellectuals, Muslim institutions, scholars really need to address, because this is something that matters the entire Ummah and the entire Islamic civilization. I recall long time ago, Malik bin Nabi, in one of his books, he spoke about the dilemma and the big problem of the Islamic society and Islamic civilization in his book, Conditions of Renaissance, and in his book, Islam in History and Society. One of the main ideas he was talking about is that Islam loses its social radiation, social impact. So he says that instead of the revivalism movements go and address the issue of bringing back the dynamism of Islam in a very big civilizational context where we are living, they go and teach people more aqidah, more usuluddin, more things which they know already. You ask any person, whether big or small, or about the 6 pillars of faith, they will tell you the 6 pillars of faith. They will tell you this is the 5 pillars of Islam, and they will do the rituals. So I think what Dr. Muhammad has put us on is how to bring back that full social radiation of Islam as a social system, cultural system, political system, economic system. And I think he has really put great questions here. I think there are many things to summarize from the lecture of Prof. Muhammad, but I really would like to thank him for this great lecture. And inshallah, we will take it up from here and move forward in the next lectures to address this type of topics, inshallah. So in the end of this, maybe before Dr. Nick to give the dua, we'd like just to present the electronic certificate of appreciation to our professor, Dato Muhammad Abu Bakr. I'm not sure whether you see this in the screen.
Yes.
Yeah, congratulations, Prof. Thank you for attending our Istac-World Professorial lecture, and we will send to you, inshallah, the real certificate, bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. With this, I would like once again to thank all the scholars, students, lecturers, the professionals, and all the people who are with us here from Malaysia and from overseas, and they are very loyal to the Istac-World Professorial lecture in the YouTube and also in Zoom here. May God bless you all, and I hand over to Prof. Khalid to continue with the end of our lecture today.
Jazakumullah khairan. Thank you, Prof. And I think that was the last thing to present the virtual certificate to Iwpl Dato Prof. Abu Bakr. Now, after that certification, inshallah, we would make sure that the real certificate arrives to Yang Berbahagia Dato Muhammad Abu Bakar, inshallah. Dato, just is matter of time, inshallah. So we are connected on the virtual world, that the real certificate would arrive soon, inshallah. With that, I would like to request, we are just on time, 4:35, supposedly to be the end of the session by dua from our Dr. Nick. Where are you, Dr. Nick? He's here. Please proceed with, and then our session ends with the Suratul Kafara, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair.
Thank you, our professor moderator, respected Dean, Professor Abdul Aziz Bahrus, professors, brothers and sisters. Let us pray to Allah for grant us more rahmah, peace, and blessing in our life. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin. Al-mab'uthi rahmatan lil alamin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Allahumma la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. Allahumma inna nas'aluka min al-khairi kullihi ajilihi wa ajilihi ma 'alimna minhu wa ma lam na'lam. Wa na'udzu bika min asy-syarri kullihi ajilihi wa ajilihi ma 'alimna minhu wa ma lam na'lam. Allahumma inna na'udzu bika min ilmin la yanfa' wa min qalbin la yakhsha' wa min nafsin la tashba' wa min da'watin la yustajabu laha. Allahumma man waliya amri min amri ummati shay'an fashaqqa 'alayhim fashquq 'alayhi wa man waliya min amri ummati shay'an farafaqa bihim farfuq bih. Oh Allah, treat harshly those who rule over my ummah with harshness, and treat gently those who rule over my ummah with gentleness. Allahumma jannibna munkaratil akhlaq wal a'mal wal ahwa wal adwa ya sami'ad du'a. Allah, oh Allah, we beg you to make our requests as the best of our supplication, and we beg you for the best success, for the best duty, and the best rewards. Allahumma ja'al jam'ana hadha jam'an marhuma wa tafarraqana min ba'dihi tafarraqan ma'suma wa la taj'al fina shaqiyan wa la mahruma wa adkhilna bi rahmatika fi ibadika as-salihin. Rabbana atina fid dunya hasanah wa fil akhirati hasanatan wa qina adzaban nar. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.
Jazakumullah.